My guest today is John Coates. John is the founder of RFsafe, and he is on a mission from a personal commitment to understand and educate the harms of non-native electromagnetic fields, non-native EMFs. These are man-made frequencies that are created and added to our natural environment. John will take us through his personal story and his findings from his life's work on the concerning topic in our modern world. By the end of the episode, you can see the genuine passion John has for this topic. We hope you find useful information on everyday products such as cell phones, computers, microwaves, routers, and Wi-Fi. In addition, John tells us about an alternative to Wi-Fi or wireless fidelity called LiFi, light fidelity. John also educates us about regulations and neglect of our health concerning these non-native EMFs. We will learn about cell phone towers next to school buildings and Section 704, which prevents people from questioning health concerns about these changes across our society. This is very concerning. Please see the show notes for John's website at RFsafe. You can search the largest database on these topics, take quizzes to help you learn about these topics, and stay up to date about any changes. Before we begin, please see the show notes for links to Daylight Computer Company and Chroma Light devices. Both of these products puts human health first. And that's very important for me. And now, my conversation with my friend, John Coates. John, I'm super excited. Let's start with you explaining how you got into your company, RFsafe, and what your mission is about.
Yep. Well, it started with a promise to my firstborn daughter that I lost to a neural tube disorder in '95. She basically, my wife worked in an environment where there was a lot of high EMFs, and and then there was a study that came out 2 years after I lost her that attributed microwave radiation to that type of a neural tube disorder, and that basically, once there was a study that actually attributed to it, I mean, there was just no, I had to, look into it, and I looked into it for years afterwards, and it's just been a constant endeavor ever since. And, I've dedicated my life into fighting what I call, I've coined entropic waste. A lot of people call it a lot of things, but when you really look at kind of what it is, and you look at the fact that, matter at its most, lowest level are still fields of energy, and, it's energy and information everywhere. And if you add, a disorder to it, it's in my opinion, that energy is entropic waste. It's just in a pollution that we just can't see, that's adding energy, and confusion and disorder and bioelectric dissonance, I guess, if you will, to a living system. So I've dedicated my life to one, understanding what it is and how it is that EMFs affected my daughter's pregnancy, or my wife and my daughter's pregnancy at the time, or pregnancy with my daughter. I'm sorry, I don't really talk about this stuff really that often. So but when it comes down to it, that particular, event in my life, it changed my life forever, and I just couldn't go back to really doing anything else. I was definitely, involved in engineering and things like that from a very young age. I had a Coates Tire and Auto right outside of Aspen, Colorado, in Glenwood Springs, and Aspen Limousine is also another service that we ran, that I owned with Mark Freiberg back then. But So I was able to put a lot of time and resources into this in the early 90s. And that's where, cell phones were just coming out at the time. But it did just kind of skip the, we really didn't start with anything with cell phones. It was, pregnancy apparel, belly bands, with as I was mentioning, with MU metal and things like that. Just to shield the torso when there was, a high EMF environment. And, but as the cell phones became popular, it became apparent to me that they were radiating just way too much energy into the torso, especially if it was just like right there in a handbag or a purse, and it was just sitting there, and ladies just aren't even going to think about it. They don't even know. And one of the things about the birth defect that took the life of my firstborn daughter is, it happens in like the first 3 weeks of pregnancy. So a lot of women might not even know that they're really even pregnant in 3 weeks. So, I mean, they're not going to know to take those extra precautions. And it's just a stage in life which is just too fragile, to where if the electromagnetic balance gets mixed up and corrupted in the process, then, bad things are going to happen. So it was just, I ended up, making an antenna design that I thought was better. It kind of drew it from nature, just interference of waves, like two pebbles in a pond. When the waves come together, they cancel each other out. So I just, we tried the idea of, making an antenna that had two elements rather than one, essentially. And, and what it did is it created a wave pattern that canceled out the RF. And while it was super effective and it totally did what I wanted it to do, it was illegal. Nobody would talk to me about it, because it violated what was called an isotropic rule at the time. And I invented this antenna in 1998, so it took a long time. It took until 2003 to even get the rule changed. And so the antenna, while very effective, one thing that it did do besides, limit the amount of radiation that was, going into the user. But if, you had a hearing aid back in the old days, like, you might remember it, like if you waved your phone by a speaker, how it would make like a static noise, like a blah. Well, now you could only imagine if you had a hearing aid, that whole rumbling noise would happen inside of your eardrum. So it's not very comfortable at all. And a matter of fact, back then it used to go by a name of motorboating, because it would sound like a motorboat, like a like when a cell phone got near their hearing aid. So it essentially made cell phones and hearing aids like 100% incompatible in the early 2000s. Now there were high, priced alternatives, but those weren't the ones that most people could afford. So because it changed the patterns and the intensity of the radiation going toward the head, it also cured the problem for hearing aids at the same time. So, Jim Johnson, teamed up with the hearing aid hard of hearing groups and things, and demonstrated that the technology was available. And then they leveraged the Americans with Disabilities Act, because the Americans with Disabilities Act says that, hey, if the technology is available to allow handicapped people to have the same access to everything else that everybody else does, then the federal government has to support it. And essentially that's what changed the isotropic rule, was the Americans with Disabilities Act for the hard of hearing, which allowed for the antenna that I invented back in 1998 to even be, considered. But it was a big breakthrough because it was a change in policy, and it's not often that you get to change a policy.
The environment of the pregnant mother, I can't speak about that enough. This is so huge for a lot of our conditions, for children, including autism. The number one problem, I think, is the environment of the mother through pregnancy, because you nailed it. It's at 3 weeks, and we're already developing the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system and the enteric nervous system. So
you're so right. It's that environment, and that's where I feel that we're, through the EMFs, we've created a low fidelity environment. And nature needs high fidelity. And through this entropic waste that's absorbed into our bodies, and in those very, very critical moments. They're so critical. And I don't think just nobody gets it. And, like the World Health Organization just came out with, their update, a revision to their previous announcement on male fertility, for instance. But they just showed, for instance, that there's a definite, now with the inclusion of one study that was certainly very high SAR, but there was even good correlation even when they removed that high SAR study. But with the high SAR study, it actually showed that there was a 68% decrease in being able to even have a pregnancy. And that's coming straight from the World Health Organization. That was just out yesterday. So I mean, there's just all these times up to even pre-pregnancy, even right before conception, and even during conception, and then the months, the entire pregnancy, and then throughout the whole life of the child. We just can't pollute their bodies with this because this energy is permeating their bodies, I mean, entirely. I mean, and it's causing what I kind of think is the easiest way to frame it is a low fidelity environment where the instructions of your internal biological genetically programmed self aren't able to execute as they're supposed to. That creates that environment in which, like you were just mentioning, is just so critical, and I don't think people get it enough. And that's why I don't support so many even EMF radiation shields for laptops and things like that. I wouldn't dream of selling somebody a flat piece of shielding to put underneath of their computer to shield their femur bone while enticing them to bring the microwave transmitter up closer to the abdomen and torso. I mean, it's the most ridiculous product in the world if you care about a baby. You can't entice somebody with shielding to protect the biggest bone in your body to actually bring the transmitter right up to the belly. No. You got to have enough sense in this industry to know when you're making a product that's actually going to endanger the most vulnerable amongst us, so yeah, I mean, it's just such a critical time, and not enough people, and even the people that say that they're helping, like by selling laptop shields and things like that, they're making the problem worse,
Profit.
Yeah.
The data are so impressive since we're talking about cell phones right now, like let's say a 4-5-year-old having a cell phone up to their ear, it just implicates the whole brain versus a teenager, young adult, it's like half the brain, and then an adult, it's just this area right here. So if you would imagine that 4 or 5-year-old just getting all of that throughout their whole skull and brain, what it's doing to the little neural tube. It's very small neural tube or crest, whatever the stage of development is massive and very concerning. It's disgusting, really, to think about how this is being avoided. Nobody's talking about it.
That's right. That's right. And it's for good reason, because they've buried it. Like, this is the most censored topic on the planet. And I say that with confidence. And you know why? Because nobody else has an unconstitutional law signed in 1996. Okay. Section 704 of the with the Telecommunications Act, of 1996. And Bill Clinton signed that into law. And there is nobody else can say that their cause literally has a law written that says you cannot protest this particular threat on the grounds of health hazards. Like, they rule out, like, you cannot protest the installment of something on the grounds of health hazards. Now, they say it's because as long as it complies with the FCC, then you cannot protest it, right? But we know very well from even RFK's lawsuit from 2021, where the Court of Appeals ruled that, that essentially they had not proved why they even relied on just this guideline. Because it just doesn't match up with reality. And as what it does match up with is 1982. It matches up with, ANSI 95.1 -1982. And that's a standard for thermal only guidelines that were made by just engineers. No doctors had anything to do with this guideline. And it was the guideline that they used to launch cordless phones in the country in the 40 and 50 megahertz range. And this was a point in time where cell phones were, very expensive, and literally only upper class families had not cell phones but cordless phones in these early days. And interesting enough, when we look at not to change it, maybe we'll come back to that. But the point being that this standard was made to launch cordless phones in the very early days of wireless in the early '80s, and then it was later adopted as the golden rule in 1996. But they still had no input from medical authorities on this exposure, like none. There were letters of concern that came from the EPA. The EPA did a big letter, and it was the earliest, some of the earliest ones were 1984. And in those same years, we had like military, feedback. Author Guy, his name was, but he was with the Air Force, 1984, and that was a 5-year study. So there was a lot of research even then that showed that there were non-thermal risk involved. And a matter of fact, even much more. The CTIA, which is the government's, or I'm sorry, the industry's own trade group, they did a $25 million study, and George Carlos, of course, basically alluded to cancer and other non-thermal risk, and he was fired, and the CTI buried it. So there was tons of proof that these particular exposures of RF had non-thermal risk involved, and yet nobody has challenged the authority of a rule that was basically assembled in the 1980s, based off of much earlier radar studies that were only an engineering guess on what would be dangerous at a thermal level. It's absurd. But because there is no, we're essentially, and then to think that same year that guideline was put into place. That was 1996. And the first year when that was put into place, the same year Section 704 was signed. That's not a, and and the EPA was essentially looking into doing more research, but the FCC took over, the EPA got defunded, and, nobody ever questioned anything. Unconstitutional laws protect them. And there's no doubt that it's unconstitutional. I mean, you think about it. Like right now, my daughter is at school, and she is in first grade, and there's literally a cell phone tower that's 465 feet away from her. That if you look at what the Bioinitiative report says, that thing should be 1,500 feet. That's what the international body of scientists are saying. But yet, because that thing is 465 feet, it's against the law for me to challenge that thing being 465 feet on health grounds. Like, that is against the law in America. It sounds absurd, but it is. And that's why it's the most censored topic on earth, because the government literally has unconstitutional laws suppressing it. If that law wasn't there, think about it. I could hire doctors, specialists to go in front of my city council and protest that tower, but I can't do that. They don't even allow it. It's just they can get sued for allowing it.
So one question is that Section 704 that Clinton signed that you said you can't protest this on the grounds of health concerns?
Yes, that is 100%, quote unquote. That is the reality in America today. That you cannot protect your children.
That is so concerning, and it's deliberate that the wording of that. It kind of reminds me of the 1986 Safety Acts for the vaccines. It's like the same thing. They're just protecting.
Yeah.
And you mentioned military. I just want to make a quick comment that Tristan from Daylight Computer Company, they're really good on this type of stuff. He's been mentioning a guy named David Frey from like 1975. The military, since you mentioned it, studied this like through the 50s, 60s, and 70s and so forth. But the follow-up question I have is, Do you think they're protecting these harms, or what they might know about this because of the infrastructure of our modern life? And
Well, we certainly have what I think is borderline a Sherman violation of a Sherman Act, because the government is propping up an industry, the microwave technology industry. And there's certainly things that are in place that make it unfair, because it makes it unfair against even just the evolution. Because see, I believe that if we were free to protest these things and we were free to make safer technology out of the demand, because if people were aware, they would want safer technology. And the fact is, the safer technology is here. Well, we actually have it, and we can transition from the microwave age now to the light age. That's totally doable, and I have patents in that realm right now with advanced LiFi networks.
yeah, I want to
Um,
ask you about that later.
yeah, and so it's very we have to start mandating Li-Fi. Like I'd say that the big call to action is, repeal Section 704 to give us back our rights to protect our children. That's number one. That should have never been taken away. And next to that, there was a law that was created in 1968, which was a Public Law 90-602, and that law actually mandated that we continuously research radiation emitting products. And that's what that's what that calls for. And that's what cell phones are. That's what routers are. That's what all these gadgets that we have are. But guess where guess where this Public Law 90-602 is? It's shelved. It's not, and that is a real law. It's not a suggestion. It's actually enacted by Congress that we have to do this. This is a mandate. But yet, when you see that the National Toxicology Program during the Biden administration during 2024 notifies the world that they're going to no longer do any more research because they don't have the funding, well, that is what you call a blatant violation of Public Law 90-602. That is a violation of that law. And so we're not following the law. We have unconstitutional laws, and it's allowing for a level of corporate capture that is that's just, it's monumental. It's almost like they have control, because it's like, what don't they have control of if they actually have unconstitutional laws on the books? Like, they have control of it all. It's not just the companies in our land. They have control of our law. It's so it's much deeper than corporate capture. It's country capture. You know.
As you were talking about that funding, my mind just instantly went with all this scam with USAID that was revealed. It's like, we have the funding. It's so disgusting to me.
Yeah.
But oh shoot, I forgot what I was going to say after that because I was so irritated about that funding comment. Um, I don't remember. So
That's
maybe
okay.
it'll come back
That's
to me.
okay.
But
Yeah,
let's
but
get in what happens.
so yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it's a very censored topic. There's so many things that are just wrong constitutionally, regulatory wise. I mean, in all honesty, the FCC should be stripped of their. I mean, I hear everybody say, "Oh, let's update the FCC guidelines." Well, first, you can't call them update them, because if you say update, you're giving some sort of credibility to the fact that they might have been legitimate at one time. Okay, but they were never legitimate at one time. So you can't use the word update for something that was completely fraudulent to begin with. There was too much evidence already available when it was adopted. And that's why there should be some sort of a congressional investigation into how we got so captured. Because, it just doesn't make any sense that it was ever allowed to happen, and that we were allowed to externalize this cost onto our children. And because that's exactly what's happened here, they've gotten away with essentially murder. And I mean, we just got to we've just got to follow through. I mean, we got to get our rights back, repeal Section 704, which Trump could do with a sign of a pen. I mean, that could be done just a swipe of a pen. And and we have. I know this gets controversial with a lot of the people within the EMF community, but when I'm faced with a cell tower that's 465 feet away from my daughter at school, versus a space-based satellite. Just factoring in the inverse square law of distance, I would much rather have her exposed to a satellite, from space than I would that tower infrastructure that's right next to her school. And on top of that, there's healthy building biology people out there, and you can definitely protect structures a lot easier if it's coming from space. I mean, you can just add a metal roof. Metal roofs even look cool, and they stand up well. And, you know, um, uh, you look on Twitter and they even say that the blue ones seem to last even better. So, yeah, I don't know. You've seen the blue roof seem to last through the fires or whatever. But bottom line, I would rather see this infrastructure put in space, and properly studied, without all these smoke and mirrors that we get, and start dismantling some of this infrastructure. Because I think we could ultimately reduce our burden of these microwaves and entropic waste by orders of magnitude, probably within 5 years, if it was properly mandated. And it wouldn't be bad for industry, because the automotive industry went through the same thing in the 1970s, right? That, we figured out that lead wasn't good to have in the gas, and we had to start reining in the emissions, right? And what did we do? We didn't say, we're going to outlaw driving or this, that, and the other. Is what we did is we put mandates on the vehicles. We said, no, you have to get your emission levels to this level by this date, and that's what it is, because that's the only way that we're going to have healthy children. And that's essentially what we have to do to the wireless industry's emissions. We have to put the same types of mandates, and by doing that, it's so easy, because you just mandate LiFi, and light-based communications over microwave-based communications, and then you don't have that penetration of depth. I mean, then we're talking skin deep versus, going all the way through, a child's brain. Like you were saying, the 5-year-old's getting, 300% more radiation than the adult is. So there's, and a matter of fact, iPhone, you can look it up and Google it, but iPhone has been working on LiFi, implementing LiFi since 2016, I think it is. So I mean, you can Google it to check it yourself, but it's in the iOS system, so it's not going to take them very much in order to basically pop the little LED in there, and you're going to have a LiFi enabled iPhone. And that would just cut on when it's available. And it's like some people say, like, oh no, it's only line of sight, this, that, and the other. Well, it's a little bit better than that, but the end result is it would only work when you were in that area. So little by little, as there was more and more coverage of LiFi, your phone would be on LiFi more often. And then as it gets more and more and more mature, eventually there'll be coffee shops that have turned in their Wi-Fi signs for LiFi signs. And then little by little, the world just is under less and less exposure of microwaves. And that's what we have to start shooting for, because nowhere in nature was there a microwave before Hertz made it. And that's a very disruptive thing to the natural environment. Like I said, we require a high fidelity environment in order to have healthy children and to be healthy ourselves. And to deprive us of that, and to deprive our children of that, is just going to be continue to, no matter what you do, like, we're not going to have healthier children just because we took food dyes out of food. But because I can choose what I feed my little girl. You know what I mean? I'm not feeding her colored Cheerios anyway. So it really doesn't even matter to me. What does matter to me is there's nothing I can do about the stuff that's hurting her, because you've made laws in America that prevent me from protecting my child. And I've already lost one child. I mean, how many children do I have to give up? I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight for my daughter in heaven and my daughter on this earth, and I'm going to keep fighting, you know?
I worked I worked in an elementary school for 3 semesters, so a year and a half, and it was pre-K through sixth grade, and I was completely shocked about how many kindergartners and first graders are just flipping out, like acute psychosis, throwing um, desks, chairs, flipping over books, bookcases, kicking and biting staff. If you go into your local elementary school and then ask them, they're going to confirm that story. And then you can ask them, how are behaviors the last 10, 15 years? And they're all going to say it's getting so bad. And nobody's doing anything about it because I think they don't. I don't know. I don't know why, but
Well, I
I
mean,
just
you're really close with the all the light activists and everything, and I mean that's a big part of it. I mean, there's just and it's so I'm so glad to see the light activists come onto the scene because you know that energy balance is so important, and nobody's paying attention to that energy, that's what we aren't just animated matter. I mean, we are energy, and when we realize that, it's that's when we're starting to make big steps forward. And when we get our environment back under control, better lighting than what the kids have. I mean, I've read studies where classrooms have been mayhem, like you were saying, and then all of a sudden they put better lighting inside of the room, and then all of a sudden the students are showing like night and day different environments. But on top of that today, though, but those studies were even things I was thinking of that happened, that I was reading from some time ago. But now they have, mandatory. Here's your tablet. Here's your Wi-Fi router that's right in every single room with 30 tablets connected to it.
yeah.
And it's just such a horrible environment. And if people could see and smell or taste microwaves, it would be the worst, nastiest place in the world. You just wouldn't want to ever walk through it.
Apocalyptic. I envision it as like apocalyptic type environments. If
Right.
we,
Yeah. And it really is.
yeah,
Yeah.
um, yeah. I don't know. I've heard, and seen like school districts be proud of implementing these like cheaper technology devices and the LED lighting because it saves them X amount of money, and and then at the same time they're like, oh, what are we going to do with all these outstanding behaviors? How are we going to reel these kids in? So they'll add like social workers, student service workers, and it's just like, no. They always say they don't have enough services and providers. It's like, no, that's not it. It's your environment sucks, and
Yep.
that's it.
Oh, and it's horrible. I mean, when you look at it, because then, like, even with like, whatever people's opinions are on the viruses and things like that, but I can tell you what, the worst place in the world you would ever want to be, is a school. The ventilation and the just the air quality inside of there. I mean, it's, man, I mean, I dread between the tower and just how they care about the children's health. It just, they surely build them in well with fences all around them, but that doesn't seem to do anything, and the real threat is just the air in their environment.
Mhm.
And quite honestly, if the air and the environment helped them develop a little bit better and they weren't going crazy in school and they were maybe not go crazy all the time crazy.
Yeah,
I don't know, but yeah, the environment there, even the EM environment, light environment, the germ environment. I mean, they just aren't really taking good care of our kids. They could do so much better because one of the things that we learned during the pandemic was about far UV light, and that's
yeah,
it's harmless to skin, and we could be cleaning the air of viruses in real time. And I did a lot of work in that, and of course I even implemented that into the LiFi system. But and it's because it's so remarkable. It's like if you really want to protect our children, you would just you would clean up the environment. You know
yeah.
that's it. You know.
So since you mentioned Li-Fi, I plan on asking. I didn't have very many questions because this is so new, and you're just a genius about this stuff. Let's talk about Li-Fi, and since you mentioned Hertz, let's go back to Hertz, his life, and then just like maybe almost in like a chronological order, get up to why we're here and what's going on.
Well,
Let's add
sure.
some substance.
Yeah,
Um,
sure. Well, and well, as we were pointing out from the little charts and everything that I threw together last night, was along with some other very first, like Alzheimer's, it was first discovered right outside of Frankfurt, and of course Hertz himself, which is the founder of the electromagnetic wave, I guess you could say, he set out to prove Maxwell's equations, and he did. And a matter of fact, he's quoted as saying that, because they asked him what he thought the significance of it was, and he actually said nothing. He said he thought it was nothing, except for it proved that there was something invisible there that you couldn't see with your eyes. And it proved Maxwell's equations. And, it's definitely, a time in which right before that, we never had anything but, 7.83 hertz, that Schumann Renaissance that everybody talks about. And now that Schumann Renaissance gets a little bit twisted though sometimes, because I think it's pretty obvious that life evolved, and much of what makes us today evolved even prior to the Great Oxygenation Event. With that in mind, that means that we didn't have exposure to Schumann Renaissance until after, biology or life had been on Earth for, maybe 500 million years, maybe even 1 billion years. I don't think, and this kind of lends to my theory that no frequencies are really native to life, except for the sun. Because especially in a water environment, these particular fields are almost non-existent. As far as the electromagnetic propagating waves, and I do believe that we've ever since the ozone layer has been created, there has been a steady 7.83 hertz, and I do believe that we evolved to that. I don't think that the 7.83 hertz does anything beneficial to us, except for the fact that we evolved to it because it was here. It not responsible or critical for anything in life, but the reason why I would say that our 8 megahertz or 8 hertz waves come in very close to it's our most relaxed state of mind. I think that's pretty obvious that we picked that up on the Earth. That it would only make sense from an evolutionary point of view that you would be at the most rest when the Earth was at its most rest. And the only time that the Earth would not be at 7.83 hertz is if something geographical was going on, bad storms, earthquakes, volcanoes, whatever. But that would have alerted early humans to there being a problem and then they needed to be more alert. So I would say that the 7.83 hertz probably served as a beacon of Earth stability to early humans for an advantage for life. And lots of animals already use low frequency ELF. Catfish use it to navigate muddy waters, and so life utilizes these frequencies already. So it would only make sense that our brain waves would synchronize at our most calm state when the Earth was at most calm. I do think that, okay, sure, if you want to expose yourself to 7.83 hertz, but it's not like it's going to medically induce something positive, except it might help you synchronize your brain to a more relaxed state that would be beneficial for your health. And therefore, if you, I do 100% believe that, if your mind is in the state of mind for healing, you can heal. And you're not going to do that under the stress responses if you're out of that. So, so anyway, that just lends to the fact that I don't think any electromagnetic radio waves or microwaves are really important for life. Even the 7.83 hertz, I think it's just something that we evolved with, and we evolved to use it, and because that's what life does. But I don't think it's critical for life, which a lot of people would believe. They believe that we have to absorb this frequency, and it's this, but I don't believe that, because we were here, or most of what makes us was already here long before that frequency was here. So I don't see where it could be that critical, except for a state of mind, to help to bring that into your more relaxed state. But but that's my theory. So a lot of people could certainly say that is wrong, but I also don't see any evidence of it being much else than that. because we did exist way before a lot of this, our mitochondria and red blood cells and things that make us up like that were already in the ocean long before that ever happened.
That
Um,
makes
you know,
that makes sense because like the delta, alpha, theta, beta, and then the low gamma, high gamma, all these different waves and oscillations going on kind of determine our mood or our consciousness and just our life.
mhm.
Within the mind, the mental areas.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
very fascinating thing.
Yeah, and so, but with that in mind, it just makes me feel that there's no real native EMF. I mean, we've learned to evolve with 7.83 hertz, but it's been consistent and it's been here forever. So we evolved to that works. Okay, but there has been no evolving for microwaves. So we're talking about this just happened with Hyman Hertz, and that's where we were touching base in the 1890s and late 1880s, where he was making his first spark gap things to make his first transmissions of transverse waves and things like that. So but interesting enough that he ends up with these sinus issues and headaches, and he's writing letters back to his parents, basically describing what modern people claim today is electromagnetic hypersensitivity, headaches and sinus pains, and it was only, and this guy went in really healthy. And there was no history of childhood illnesses or anything. So he was, all history books show him as being a very, very healthy person right up until the time that he started messing with the electromagnetic waves. And literally, to think that he ends up contracting a autoimmune disease, which had never been recorded before. It's not even a recorded medical condition when he gets it. And it's not until another 3 decades later that that once the rest of Germany is exposed to these same radio waves or Hertzian waves at the time, finally someone else, but only in Germany, gets the same autoimmune disease.
Mm.
You know, so the guy discovers that in 1936 that disease gets a name. GPA. I'm not going to be able to pronounce it right, so I'll stick with what they call a GPA. But it's an autoimmune disease, and yeah, the second person to get it, where it officially gets registered in the books, comes from also Frankfurt area. And it doesn't happen in any other part of the world. It happens only with the small group in the population of the world that's exposed to microwave or to radio wave, frequencies, radiation. Um, so that's an interesting point. And then of course the fact that the first Alzheimer's patient comes from the exact same area as well seems a little bit coincidental in the fact that happened. Because we do have a lot of studies that are indicating that there could be, mechanisms that could trigger these conditions, especially with those that are predispositioned in any way. But so in the early 1800s or late 1800s and early 1900s, we unleashed and he died in just a few years after, so I mean, that was a pretty severe autoimmune disorder that he had. And I think it's like 2 out of a million people have that disorder today. So it's extremely, extremely rare. So that just makes it more odd that he would be the first one to ever get it, even before it was ever diagnosed. Um, but that's a theory that I kind of just had last night and kind of shared with people. But when you look at the facts, that it all kind of fits. So I think somebody might want to say it. So, you
That
know.
that Alzheimer's patient is very curious too because Alzheimer's didn't get a medical name until 1911. And then at the same time, in these 19 teens, type 1 diabetes was really, really bad.
Mhm.
And then autism hit in mid 1930s,
Well,
and then,
technically, with the first patient, the lady that would be called patient Zero, Augusta, I think her name was, but she was admitted into the hospital in 1901, and she lived in Frankfurt.
Mhm.
And I think his first paper was where he described her condition in this early onset, because it had been heard of before, but with 70 and 80-year-olds, not 45-year-olds. But I think he made that distinction of this in like 1906. But and even with it being that early, it still lines up with the fact that she would have been exposed to radio waves for a good maybe 15 to 10 years prior to her diagnosis.
Yeah.
So
And it just accelerates it.
yeah, yeah.
And I think that's what we can easily see the rates of these various dementias. Now we have so many dementias, by the way, people, they're just increasing so much, and the age of onset is decreasing. And it's the same as autism. The mother of the Canner kids were like college professors and head nurses and things like teachers, and they were professional, is what they were. Like 9 out of the 11 had college graduates, and the other two that didn't have a college degree were like administrative assistants. So they were indoors all the time, and they come from wealthy families. So the grandparents of the Canner kids, they had, I'm just imagining, I have no way of knowing, that their houses were fully equipped, modernized for that time. And this something about that just sticks with me. I think there's a lot there. But yeah, that was a kind of a sidebar I wanted to just mention. So after what from Frankfurt, how does it go on from there?
Well, I mean, shortly after that, you got Malconi sending signals across the ocean. And everything is going full steam from there. And there's never any idea about health effects, even though seemingly a lot of new diseases pop up around where the wireless does, and its founder dies just shortly after, the guy that first makes the first radio waves. And it's crazy that no history books anywhere even remotely suggest that his radio frequency work could have been responsible for his death. But I think if any of the new age doctors here should be able to really kind of put that together, because we're seeing a lot of evidence now for how RF radiation can attribute to autoimmune disorders. Through the calcium ion channels, or the reactive oxygen species, or there's plenty of methods in which we can prove this now. And so it might be time to look back at the history book and kind of add a footnote that we might have figured something out about history. And the founder of RF radiation might have been the very first victim of it too.
I'm also reminded of a modern human, Steve Jobs. Well, that's pretty obvious, And this non-native EMF, with the mitochondria and ROS, non-native EMF just destroys the mitochondrial DNA. Those cytochromes and the heme proteins and things, and that ROS is just so out of control.
Yeah.
After this 1900s, how does society kind of get into more and more exposure to it? Can you talk through some key
Yeah.
times?
Well, then we started electrifying America. And of course, a lot of people, gosh, you hear a lot of people talking about Nikolai Tesla, and gosh, if he would have gotten a chance to create wireless energy and all. And whenever I hear that, I actually am very grateful that he didn't. Because, but the Lord works in mysterious ways, right? So obviously the bankers shut down his projects because they had vested interest in copper mines and things like that. But when it comes down to it, we weren't ready to have our environment pumped full of enough energy in order to light your light bulbs. That was never, ever, ever going to be a good idea. And a matter of fact, we would have never had the technology, the breakthroughs with chips and things that we had, because there'd have been so much static electricity in the air and the environment that you would have never been able to make a computer chip. So we would have been able to plug our irons into the ground, or our light bulbs into the ground, like for a lamp, but you would have never had a computer. So I mean, you gotta almost kind of be grateful that that we didn't permeate the atmosphere with as much voltage as what old Tesla was looking for. I don't think that would have been very healthy. It would have been, we would have been exposed to maybe orders of magnitude more than what we are today, but way back then with far less medical knowledge. We weren't ready for it. And I think, when we start to look at how the evolution of technology is going to go, I mean, eventually, of course, we had to go to AC electricity just to get the energy long distances. But as we start to realize that we can harness more energy from the sun in renewable ways, houses might become a lot more DC. Which would be a lot, safer for us anyway, rather than having the low frequency ELF 60 hertz and, of course, European countries 50 hertz. But, but our electrical grids aren't healthy either. So it's more than just cell phones and non-ionizing radiation from those wavelengths. It's, like I was saying, any radio frequency radiation, it just wasn't here when life first evolved, and I don't think the 60 hertz or just any of them that, I think God created, he basically sends energy and information with two groups of frequencies, and that's sound frequencies and light frequencies. And he didn't choose the ones in between there for a reason. And nature knows what's best, and if nature didn't choose the stuff in between sound and light, there's probably a reason that we needed that to remain a high fidelity area in order for life to do what it needs to do. But we create the low fidelity environment, and when we get back to the stuff like conception and child development and things like that, this might sound a little, a lot of people don't think of it this way, but I look at even like what happened to my daughter and even, what I would say would be the most dramatic, thing, because, a child doesn't even live very long. It's a very horrible birth defect. But these lesser degrees of these developmental effects, I think, can also be attributed to this loss of coherent information and entropy that's added to the system. And is kind of what I'm saying is like, I made a post the other day that showed where a beaver that had never ever been near its parents to see it build a dam, was rescued, and of course it lives with this family, and it still grabs all the pillows in the house and builds a dam in the hallway. But it's never, ever seen nobody build a dam before. So where is this? How did this information get passed from mom and dad beaver to this little beaver that had never seen a beaver build a dam? But he's building a dam. And I think humans aren't that much different. I think if you're born an alpha male or a beta male or whatever, if you have a pristine environment that's high fidelity to pass on your traits like that beaver, well, guess what? Your son is also an alpha male or a beta male. He wasn't born not knowing who he was. So I believe that there can be degrees of this bioelectric dissonance in how it affects development, right down to like what happened with my daughter is the worst in a physical defect. But I think there can be degrees of this that go right down to just where you harm traits. Like you don't have to harm the actual biology. You might just be tweaking the biology just enough to where you weren't able to pass on the traits that child would have had. I mean, ADHD and all these things are much, much more complex than what I'm probably getting ready to say it. But if you can't pass on the traits that you have in order to pay attention, is that ADHD? It's so I think that high fidelity environment has an insane spectrum across the board. I think that might even cause what we might be seeing today as an empathy deficit disorder. And I think that's where we might get such violent actions that we see within the public and children today, where the traits of empathy and love and compassion just aren't being passed on like they were. That like it would be like if the beaver couldn't build the dam anymore, you know. But yeah, so I see there's is so I see this EMF and destruction that we've done to our natural EM environment is just way bigger than cancer, way bigger than a single birth defect. It's the core essence of what life needs to replicate healthy like nature intended is a pristine, high fidelity environment. And then when you rob life of that, you open up the doors to everything. Like nothing is off the table because you corrupted the process in which it builds everything upon. I mean, you can't separate the matter from the wave functions. I mean, quantum mechanics tells us that. And so you can't pretend that the matter isn't part of the energy in which it's derived from. And when we start to really throw that off with energy that shouldn't be there, and when I shouldn't be there, that's why it's entropic waste. It's energy without purpose for life. We might have a purpose for it. You're sending your call there and there, but for nature, that disruption has no purpose in nature, none, zero. And that's not what was here before Hertz started to pluck the first strings of electromagnetic radiation.
Yeah, we don't have to use the cell phone. We were here without cell phones.
Right.
But the non-native EMF thins out myelin sheets.
Yeah.
So we're talking. You mentioned ADHD and autism's bad about this too. But like the difference between a thick myelin is like an interstate for traveling, and then if those are thinned out, it's like a gravel road. And there's a big difference in traveling there.
Mm-hmm.
And that can happen if you're developed. It can reverse and thin out that myelin, or if you are developing like the child, it's just going to implicate that. You're not going to have that thickened myelin.
I'm really, really, really impressed and glad that you actually said that. When you look at the disorder, the birth defect, the neural 2 disorder that took my daughter's life, the myelin shield has a lot to do with that. I mean, it's a very critical part of what allows for that entire birth defect to actually happen. So yeah, I totally 100% agree.
That's the neural tube, if I'm not
Mm-hmm.
mistaken, correct.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Also, the time where spinal bifida occurs, if I'm
Mm-hmm.
not mistaken.
You're right. Yeah.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. Which is a less severe case of the neural tube disorder. When it's anencephaly, and literally the top of the brain doesn't even form the top of the skull. It is pretty horrible. Yeah.
Okay. Which what frequencies is it known at what point do the frequencies start to open up the blood brain barrier?
Well, that's the crazy part that I think they're all just outright dangerous. If we're not using light, then I think we're using something that we're just not equipped to handle. And every study that we see, we're starting to see a lot of non-linearities. And I think this is important to mention because, the classical theory of SAR is basically if you have more power, you're in more danger. And that's what people would tend to believe. But that's a linear assumption that actually doesn't hold up to the science whatsoever. And it's important to understand that because when you even look at the National Toxicology's program, that was done at 1.5 watts and 3 watts and 6 watts, and of course a 0 watt sham. But when you think about which study had the worst effect, well, in this linear world, you would assume that okay, well, the 6 watts had the biggest effect. But that's not what happens. The National Toxicology Program showed us that the 1.5 watts had more cancerous lesions in it than the 6 watts. So there's a nonlinearity here. And then you look at these recent sperm studies, which are very important to point out because they found that the highest amount of oxidative stress occurs at 4 hours versus the 6 hours and 12 hours of continuous exposure. So a longer exposure duration at 8 hours and 12 hours in 6 hours or whatever, had less of effect than the 4 hour exposure. And this was from a February of 2025 study. I can send you a link to it. But it shows you that literally our bodies begin to kick in some sort of a innate response to deal with the EMF exposure, but only after it's been exposed a certain amount of time. So by initiating a shorter exposure time, you could end up doing more cumulative damage. So our ideas about what's dangerous and what's most dangerous and what isn't, like no one on earth could give you that honestly. Like nobody could be honest about that answer, because the fact is we don't have any idea at what power, we don't have any idea at what frequency, we don't have any idea at what duration. So if you can't pick any of that and know which one is less or more harmful, well, then you have to come to the reality of the truth that they're all dangerous. That until we can prove that one of these are safe, and right now we don't have anything proven to be safe, except for the environment that God gave us. That's the one that's proven to be safe. But we got to turn the clock back to get that. We gotta, but we can start to take real action, that mandating LiFi, the reinforcing public law 90-602, repealing section 70, section 704. I mean, it's, there is a plan to go forward. But right now we're just not even recognizing the most basics, that we've done such a great harm to the environment that is what's harming our children. And that's it's not the other things. There could be there's a lot of things that are bad for people, but when you look at really what's worse is this constant, like with the vaccines, and I'm totally in support of the fact that when you inject a vaccine, you're injecting something that is going to be making some sort of a bioelectric difference in your body. I mean, ultimately, any drug that you take, any food that you ingest, anything that you do, at the very end of that chain, it made a difference in electromagnetic potential somewhere down the line. And that's a fact. And when we inject ourselves with a vaccine, absolutely, you're throwing your body into bioelectric mayhem, but ultimately it builds a response to that. And one of the things that I think are amazing about the human body is it can heal, and it can heal from a short, like when you give it a short-term assault, no matter what it is, the short-term assault, give that body the good energy it needs, the food that it needs, and the rest that it needs, and you can recover from a short-term assault. And you can go right back to normal again. But what you can't do is go back to normal when your body is under a constant assault, where the baseline can just never even really be 100% discovered again. So now you're injecting an assault, and the body doesn't even know where the baseline is anymore, because you've got all this confusion and dissonance within the bioelectricity of the body itself. The energy and information is being corrupted. I think it's just really important to understand that it's not all vaccines, and it can't be all vaccines, because one, there's a lot of people that didn't take the vaccine that've got autism. I mean, it's not only people that, and I hear some people say, oh, well, the Amish don't have autism because they don't take the vaccines. Well, they also don't have Wi-Fi routers, and they also don't have cell phones, and that's also what they don't have. So
their environment looks like ours 130 years ago. They're
in
outside. They don't have all this electricity and artificial light at night.
mm-hmm, you're
So
exactly right.
people like to see something, they discover something, and they think, oh, that must be it, or that is it, because they can make sense of it. We
Right.
don't like to have our beliefs offended. So no way is it the light or the electricity or the microwaves.
Right, yeah, but in reality, it is bioelectric dissonance, and the light causes bioelectric dissonance. The microwaves cause bioelectric dissonance, and yes, the shot is going to cause bioelectric dissonance, and it's just how can the body recover is the question, and can the body recover? And is the body going to be able to recover if you've given it a very low fidelity environment to do so? Well, nature didn't intend you to do that. That was not that's not what God made us to do. God made us the ability to heal, but he did not give us the ability to deal with a constant assault in our environment. And that's what we're doing to ourselves right now. I mean, people are getting sicker and sicker, younger and younger. I mean, I had kidney cancer when I was just a kid. I mean, I guess you could say cancer survivor, child cancer survivor. But in 1977, I had my left kidney removed. I had cancer, and we lived on a military base at the time. And I'm pretty sure that I got exposed to a lot of radar and a lot of everything at the different military bases that my family was on when I was a kid. But you're just crazy because I remember, I mean, kidney cancer was kind of even dialysis machines and stuff like that were huge back in the 70s. I mean, then I stayed in the hospital for a couple months actually, throughout the whole ordeal. And I'm not really sure if I had to end up staying there that long just because it was easier for the way that my family was and the fact that my dad was on active duty and whatnot. But I was in there throughout a couple holidays like Easter, Christmas, Halloween. I remember people dressing up as everything through the wards. But the one thing that left a big impression on me, because of course I didn't know if I was going to live then because, just you would say. Military hospitals back then, I don't know, maybe they're still that way, but it was just a big long hallway and there was kids' beds all lined up down the hall and every bed would have a blanket or a curtain that would wrap around the bed. So you could always see all the kids, up and down the ward. And sometimes parents would come and get their stuff and the kids didn't come out of surgery. And you just never saw them again. And, I think that left a big impact on me even as a child, because, it wasn't too many more years. Heck, I started college when I was 15 years old at Tidewater Community College in Virginia. And, so it wasn't long after, I think I was, like 8 years old when 77. So I would have been like 8 years old, 8 years old when I had the kidney removed. But it changed my life though. It made me really, it made me understand how fragile life was. I think that's what I kind of probably took away from it, and just how precious it was. And what a miracle it was. And I was lucky enough to come home after all that, and I've stayed cancer free until recently, but the but ultimately, after losing my firstborn child and just, being in a position of just, a child that was pretty vulnerable myself, even when I was a kid, we got to do better at protecting the kids, and because I'm pretty sure it was the environment that caused my cancer. I mean, as soon as I wasn't near any military bases anymore, I didn't have any more kidney cancer. So where did kidney cancer come from? I mean, it's not like that was something that runs in your family, so, but I just have a feeling that I was kind of put on this earth to do what I'm doing right now. And that's and I do it every day, and I pray that I'm doing the right things, and always, I'm never one to just be single focused on the fact that EMF is like all it could be, because I never say that. Just as I, address the vaccines, is yes, they're both bioelectric dissonance. They just affect each other. They're just affecting us differently. I mean, one is a temporary assault and one is a constant assault. Um,
Yeah.
and, and I think that constant assault is something that nature just did not equip us to deal with. I think nature actually equipped that we can deal with a short-term assault. Maybe not always, but for the most part, I think we can, if given everything else, the right light and food and rest, and I think we can heal, but not Not when it's a constant assault, though.
Hospitals used to send their patients outside. Um,
Yeah, right. This
yeah,
absorb some sun. Yep.
yeah.
Yep. Yep.
I just saw an article yesterday, I think, or 2 days ago, about the rates of autism is much, much higher for military families. I didn't look into it yet to see if it has validity or their methods and interpretation and things, but that kind of struck me.
Yeah, the very first person I knew that had an autistic child was a friend of mine, Ed, in the early 1980s, and he was a guy that he was a he was a deputy sheriff, so he had the radios on his belt all the time, and and his scanners. He's all into the radiation and radar guns, you name it, but he was the very first person that I actually ever knew that had a child that was born with autism. Ed Myers.
Wow. It's
I really think it's the environment.
yeah. Yeah, I do too. The things that we're talking about, more
Yeah,
so.
yeah,
Those other things can too, but
yeah,
this is really because what you were highlighting, you described so well the amount of we're constantly under these situations that's not natural, like the light and these frequencies. That's not natural, and it's the amount of it. And you mentioned the food dyes earlier, and that's what I was going to mention earlier. Whenever I was like, I lost it, is yeah, we eat 3, 4 times a day, whatever the case, and we can choose what we eat. And some people eat healthy, but they still have problems.
hmm
So
yeah.
it's just something that's easy to kind of target, I
Yep.
think, to maybe even, hey, look at what we're doing. We're going to fix this. And I'm not saying that they're not a problem. It's just not nowhere near the top of the
It's
list.
not. It's not the problem that we actually voted to get RFK and Trump together
Yeah,
to win.
yeah.
Because he's going after Fruit Loops, but he said that he knew how to dismantle the corporate capture. I mean, that's what he told us. He said, "I know how to take it
Hmm.
all down. I've sued them the most." And you know what? I that's what we need. I mean, he told us what we need, and we know that that's what we need. But now he's coming after the Fruit Loops, and he's in this, that, and the other, and banning kids from phones. Now look, now I'm the anti-radiation guy, right? If anybody should agree with banning the phones from kids at schools, it should be me, right? But no, I'm going to be the first one to tell you that's a delay tactic. Okay,
Hmm.
look, the cigarettes, okay, all right, in the 1890s, okay, they banned kids from buying cigarettes in towns in New York, okay, 1890s, okay, all right, I'm sorry, I think it was the 1880s, it might have been the 1880s, and when they ended up actually putting a warning label on those cigarettes when they would actually that this could cause cancer.
Probably about 80 years after that.
100 years,
100
a
years. Okay.
century later, okay, that they put the real warning on there. These will cause cancer, and blah blah blah. That came about in 1985, I believe it was, right? And so banning children from something is just a way of saying, you know, we're trying to make you look like we care, but
Yeah.
ultimately nothing changes. It's the status quo. We're still going to make all this money by killing you, and nothing's going to change. And maybe in 100 years, we'll put a label on the cell phone and we'll say, no, it really does give you cancer. No,
Hmm.
I don't think we have that kind of time. I don't think this is
Yeah.
a thing where we can actually wait 100 years. So we have to immediately call a tactic like that out. If we've already seen that tactic play out exactly the way that industries want that tactic to play out, the we ban kids tactic,
Hmm.
then we're just asking for 100 more years of this. We can't accept that as something that's really tangible that can help our children. What really helps our children is demanding that device manufacturers make them safe for our children. Look, if you want to change, look, I don't want to take a phone away from a kid. That one of those latest school violence issues, it was like a second grader or something, like a 7-year-old girl or 9-year-old girl that called 911. And, if it wasn't for that little girl calling 911 when she did, other kids may have been harmed. So I don't agree with the fact that we need to strip the only lifeline that a kid has in a potentially most horrible, horrific situations that they could be in, and now they can't call their parents or call for help, 911 or whatever. No, you don't take it away from kids. Is what you do is you force the device manufacturers to make them safe for kids, okay? We can geofence the phones, all right? So if you want the phone to do only one thing the second that it gets on the school property, have a geofence app on it. Make the government and the technology companies work together so that schools phones only act one way when they walk into the building. And it's prioritizing learning apps or whatever. But it doesn't. You can't get on TikTok, and that's all within our technical capabilities. Okay, you walk in, phone changes, as in it's the geofence, but you don't take it away from them. You make it compatible with LiFi so it doesn't irradiate them with energy, and you just make the technology safe. There's nothing, anytime somebody says that we have to take something away from you to make it better, just know that that's probably BS.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? If they have to take something away from you to make it better, that's not what I believe is the solution. I think the solution is addressing the problem, address the entropic waste that the device puts out, get the cell tower away from the kid's school. Because hey, what is RFK's ban going to do to help my first grader that has a cell tower 465 feet from her desk? Banning kids from school is not going to help. She's not going to take a cell phone to school. Okay, so who is he really helping? Help who he said he was going to help, and that was he was going to take down the corporate capture. He was going to go ahead and make the companies abide by rules that were going to make the environment healthier for our children. I don't see that. Banning kids from having phones at school is a dangerous precedent over just making the technology safer, which we have the capability to do.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
That is the goal. That it should be our direction.
Yeah. It should be the only direction because our goal has to be to clean this environment up for the kids. Anything else is a distraction. Anything. Yep.
I can't
That's
agree.
principle. Yep.
Has there been anything we haven't covered that you find salient right now?
Well, I would like to go out onto a theory realm, if you'd like to. I think that when we start to think about this bioelectric dissonance and what it does to the energy and information, a lot of people follow great people like Dr. Michael Levin. God, I respect him just a ton, right? We've had a small engagement on Twitter in the past, and I just respect that the direction of his work. I know a lot of people in the EMF community kind of want him to accept our way of thinking, but science is about making other people think the way that you think. That's not even what science is even about. And he's very rigorous in the way that he approaches his research, and I think his work is super valuable in the direction that he's going. So I don't think he needs to follow what we do in the radiation is going to harm you side of things, where he's trying to figure out the intrinsic properties of the bioelectricity itself. And while I respect that idea, you have to remember that some of the ideas behind what his direction has taken us is that that DNA is a static. It's just static, for building proteins and blah blah blah, and it doesn't have anything to do with, say, just how you developed and everything, which I think is kind of crazy. And when we think about how where could the energy, and this has been something that has questioned me since day one, right? Because I always needed to try to understand how is it that the energy affected the neural tube to where it didn't know what to do anymore. you
Hmm.
know, and so that's a big question, you know, what went wrong, where was the programming, and what was programmed, and where is this program at that was going to make everything the way that it was supposed to be versus how it got corrupted. And I believe I have a good idea where that is. And I think that's kind of the breakthrough of it, because where Michael Levin and them, I believe, look at this from a very topological sense, where the energy um, is basically defining its Bayesian principles, maybe in a way you could say, through just the energy on this higher topological view. But I believe that the DNA, along with the microtubules, because it even kind of brings together OR theory, Penrose and Steve and Hammerhoff's, ideas, and kind of bringing them together with Michael Levin's. And then if you bring it together with what I'm saying, that DNA itself, through the molecular structure of resonating atoms, I believe that is where your evolutionary core data is stored, right? So, you have the multiple, four elements or whatnot that the DNA is made of. If you have an oxygen and an oxygen that are next to each other, or a nitrogen and a nitrogen next to each other, these frequencies, when you're dealing with atoms, they're gonna these elements are always going to resonate at the exact same frequency. And just like a cell phone with a cell tower, if they're tuned to the same frequency, there's a connection there. And I believe that the DNA itself, it contains a neural network, if you will. So it's not static. I don't believe DNA to be static. I believe and I do believe that we're even going to be able to map it at a given time, means that we know where to maybe look for this now. In the same way that like AlphaFold, triangulates the spaces of atom, or the spaces between the molecular structures, and folding their proteins. I think one day we'll be able to use a very similar process to map the weights and biases of a person's own um, uh, evolutionary network, if you will. Because the DNA, in my opinion, is a neural network like your brain, but it's the long-term evolutionary storage of data. It's what evolution is given you. In each cell, in this opinion, would mean that each cell, and this means each piece of mitochondria, or every mitochondria, every cell. So you have your nuclear DNA, you have your mitochondrial DNA. Each one of these are individual neural networks, that are on the exact same weights and biases. So mom gave you the mitochondrial DNA, and that network is the same as every single other mitochondrial DNA in your body. So if it's hundreds or whatever per cell, so on top of your 50 trillion cells, and then another 300 per cell or whatever for mitochondria, what do you, maybe like 50 quadrillion individual large language models, if you will, that run your body. And so I think that where things get messed up is the energy is processed in the microtubules, where like OR theory, is saying that, this is where the consciousness comes from. Well, I would argue that is where like if you were to think of it in AI terms, it would be kind of like an autoencoder, where they're taking higher dimensional data and then bringing it into a lower dimensional feed, in which is then resonates through the DNA in order for it to output how it should deal with the gene expression and things like that. I think is a process of something like this, where this energy and information must work together in order to properly address the probability of its microenvironment. So any given cell in any piece of mitochondria, or any individual mitochondria, all knows what to do in a given microenvironment for itself, because they're all trained on the exact same data, mom and dad's DNA. Um, And, so it's just like if you were to zoom away from Earth and every car on Earth was a Tesla and you looked at the roads, it would look like everything was talking to each other. But in reality, they were just all running the same software, and they're able to respond no matter where they are in the environment, the same as they would if any of them were in that particular position. I think that's why, the end of a finger knows why it's the end of a finger. Is because each cell everywhere can respond no matter where it is, because it's all running on that same evolutionary train data. So I don't believe that that the code isn't somewhere. Like I think Levin kind of lends us to believe that the energy itself makes the code, and I think that the processing is actually done through the DNA. And that's a little bit of a stretch, but there's not really anything that can say that it isn't, because the alignment of the atoms are there. Like, so what I'm talking about being somewhere, we can actually point to, how it actually works exactly. Well, we have a lot of things that might be able to point to how it does work, in combination of the microtubules and, the structure of the cell, because this would mean that like if I have an AI here and you have an AI there and they're both trained on the exact same network, same computer hardware, everything, if I ask it a question here and you ask it there, it's going to be a very close to the same answer. We have the exact same AI. And is what I'd kind of, when you take DNA out of a cell and you look at DNA by itself, that's kind of like grabbing the weights and biases out of our AI and our computer and sticking them on the table and looking for intelligence within that array of numbers. And there is no intelligence in just a bunch of numbers, just like there isn't really any intelligence in the in the DNA itself. But once you put it back into the computer, into the structure of the cell, and it's able to, to process the energy and information within its environment, and now it's dynamic and intelligent to deal with its microenvironment. And that's how I think all the cells end up ultimately knowing what they need to do. I think that's all within I think it's all within the DNA. And a lot of people will say that's absolutely not true, that, that it's not in the DNA. But, so far, I actually believe that is in the DNA. I believe the DNA, if you just look at it, can constitute weights and biases, because how far apart two atoms are going to give us how energy travels through that resonating matrix. And if you just move one a little further, just given just the physics that we understand today, just the inverse square law of distance, that's going to change the field tension between these resonating elements, and energy that propagates through that is going to propagate in a weighted potential, just like a neural network does. And so I think that it's a hard coded neural network that's within our genome and our DNA. So, and there's a lot of a lot of that is hypothetical, in just kind of a theory that I have. But in reality, that's the way that I look at the way that the body works, is that it's processing energy and it's processing information, and it's dealing with its microenvironment on every single scale. And that's why I think it's that important that everything stays in the ability to, because the cool thing is like, if you do something that throws it off, it's still only going to react off of what the trained data can do. Like, so it can't just come up with crazy things just because you injected something somewhere, but it is now going to have to factor in whatever you added to the microenvironment. If it's a vaccine into your body or whatever, it's going to now have to factor in these added bits of information and energy into the equations that it would normally process. And that's where we would get the incorrect outputs of our biology from these entropic inputs. And so when you add entropic inputs, then you just get bad outputs,
Yeah, I follow. That's a very fascinating way of looking at it, and I think I'm gonna.
Yeah.
I can't not look at it now, because you're
Right,
absolutely.
right, right. I looked
Yeah.
at it it was about 15, maybe 20 years ago. I was literally just staring at what in this DNA went wrong where that neural tube didn't close. Like why?
Mhm.
Like why didn't it know what to do? What made it
Mhm.
decide that it just didn't know what to do anymore? And
Mhm.
God, I was studying DNA just crazy, and I actually saw it then. And I just saw how all these atoms would totally create a connection of networks that would just that literally could be a network. And but at that time, I didn't know anything that much about AI or anything, no more than anybody else really did, except for the old work that was done. That but there was no compute power and stuff like that to push it. But but there, so. With my knowledge now, especially in AI, and I do a lot of work with AIs as well, and but looking at it today, it's just obvious what that network could be, and what these weighted connections can be. And because they do become weighted, like I said, just their space away from each other makes them
Mhm.
weighted.
Yeah.
And so just by moving an atom ever such of a slight little bit in the hard code of the metric of the matrix of the DNA, it is going to make some sort of a processing difference. But you don't have to directly affect the DNA, because you can affect how the DNA ends up processing the signals, which are encoded from, say, the microtubules and the rest of the cellular exoskeleton. All because, see, if you change the computer, or say the microtubule exoskeleton structure, by changing just what the shape of that cell is, changes how the energy is processed through the DNA, and how it deals with the energy and information which it has to deal with to control its microenvironment. Um, so
Yeah.
that's where I don't see things the same as leaving in them. Like, I totally believe in everything that he's doing and find no flaws in anything, but I see it as the topological layer. And then I see mine as kind of the inside layer, and I do believe that he'll be able to figure everything out from that face of the mountain, right?
Mhm.
But I think if you actually wanted to ever figure out like what made me or you or anything else go wrong somewhere, to totally customize, because see, you just can't assume that everybody's bioelectricity and a certain change in bioelectricity in one place is going to affect me the same as it does you, right?
Mhm.
So his theory eventually will have to come to an extreme personalization level, right? Because you just can't assume that, oh yeah, well, it works like this for all other life forms, so when I do
Mhm.
this, it's going to do that by just triggering these couple ion gate channels here and there, but no, because your overall genetics is going to be different. So you aren't always going to respond the exact same. But I do believe eventually, when we can implement and understanding the distance between atoms in your DNA, will eventually equate to understanding the software of the weights and biases of your network. And then totally customized electrocuticles, I guess they're called now, would be able to be made, directly for one's bioelectricity for the software in which they run on.
Mhm.
So it's just looking at, so I don't disagree with anything that the Penrose theory says, the OR theory, and I really don't have much to disagree with Lieben, except for the fact that I believe that DNA plays a more critical role than just static proteins. Yeah.
Okay. The space and time components, like really dialed in or
Well,
zoomed.
Well, right. Well, we are part of space and time, and that's kind of
Yeah.
the whole part of it. We're not different from our environment. Like, we can't consider that we're different from the space and time that we exist in. We're definitely part of that, and it's how that matter is organized in space and time is how our bodies process energy and information. You
Yeah.
know, from that
Ah,
matrix. But that's just kind of but that's just something that I kind of thought of in order to conceptualize how radiation affects the body. That's the method that I run on. I know there's a lot of other people that use a different way of thinking about it, but I think of it all as energy and information in a program, which has which is given a evolutionary default. And if you start to mess up the environment, that evolutionary default is not going to run like it's supposed to, the program. And when you start screwing with the program, well, bad things happen. Yeah, yeah.
Man, I knew I would enjoy this. Just well said.
But I actually call it Cellum theory, CELLM. Yeah, for a cellular latent learning model.
Huh.
Yeah.
It's it is as far upstream as we can go, as much as we can zoom in, is always the right approach, I think.
Yeah. But yeah, man, and then of course there's a lot of things as far as like with the technology. I think that of course, LiFi is one of the important things that we can do. But when it comes to people and what they can do to reduce radiation, it's you always try to if you can put it on the airplane mode before it goes in your pocket, cell phones. But you got to remember that there's essentially not much you can do, except for just using practices that are, don't put the phone to your head if you don't have to. Keep it away from your, reproductive organs. Um, you have to use the real physics that work, which is distance and duration. And we don't know what dangerous frequencies are. We know that there's tons of dangerous frequencies, but nobody can confidently ever tell you what a safe level is or what we just don't have that data in order to truly say that you'd be safe if you only exposed yourself for this long or that long. So ultimately, people have to understand that we have to make a big change. That the big change, which is completely going back to the drawing board on what we're considering a safe environment. And that means we got to rein in, the microwaves and start transitioning to light. And there's going to be a learning curve even with light. But the beautiful thing is that now so many people are so familiar with the importance of this energy that's given to us from the light that we're finally going to have people that are going to be able to want to have this type of research. Because believe it or not long ago, there wasn't many people at all that would even cared about the type of light, the blue light and the fluorescent lights and the whatever. This is relatively, still a new thing, and it's going to become more mainstream because there's no way that you can deny the importance of the bioelectric, aspect and how we absorb energy and what we do with that energy, you know. So it's really an exciting time, but people have to understand that it's our voices and it's, when we think about, oh my God, all this stuff is so dangerous and bad. We have to understand that it's our voice that fixes it. There's no gadget that you're going to go buy. You're not going to go buy some magical rock or some magical pendant or some, none of that is going to help. The only thing that will really help is if you organize with people, your friends, your family, your school boards, your towns, and you start to, protest Section 704. Start to, demand a LiFi, demand that the EPA is given back the regulatory authority and strip it away from the FCC altogether because they've done such a bad job. So it's actions that we have to take as communities in order to really to make a difference in this. Because we still got a long way to go before we all understand the physiological and biological effects, and we've got a long way to go. We don't know enough, but we do know enough to see that it's dangerous. But we don't know enough to say that any degree of safety can be derived from our current level of exposures. I don't think it can be done, and that's why. And that makes it kind of hard being a guy that well, I really don't sell anything, to be honest with you, because they're not even really my cases; they're just my designs. But when it comes down to it, we even sell a phone case that we try to let you know as much as possible up front that there's no way that the shielding material in the front cover can guarantee that you'll be safe. And we're the only people in the world that would ever sell a product and tell you that. Everybody else says, oh, it'll protect you 99%, but no, that's not what we do at all. We try to just be honest with people because only through that can they really understand what they really have to do? I mean, you can't tell people that this gadget will make them safe when the only thing that's going to make them safe is if they actually take action to protect our children, to clean up this environment, speak up. And gosh, and that's how easy it is, because you know how Trump is a real people person. If a people really started to say post, Trump repeal 704, and if there were thousands and thousands of people that did that, he would probably break the pen out
Yeah.
and literally just repeal 704. No biggie. Just because he wants people to like him, well, at least he wants people to like him for the right reasons, I think it's all up to the people. So much of the control is in our hands, but yet everybody just wants to point at how everybody's doing something wrong and wrong and wrong, where we all have a chance and an opportunity to totally speak up and to really address the root causes, not the Fruit Loops, not the banning kids from having phones, but the manufacturers that are allowed to poison our environment and externalize the cost onto our children. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. That sounds like a good place to wrap this up.
Yeah.
Um,
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. It's been
yeah,
super awesome.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll have some follow-up questions, so maybe we'll get together again in
Oh,
the future.
please. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
maybe we'll do another one.
Yeah.
Well, John, thanks so much.
You betcha, buddy. Thank you, Ryan, and God bless, and have a great day. And like I said, if you have any other questions or anything, just I'm always available, man. I love the opportunity, and I probably ramble too much, but I'm not, I'm just trying to. There's so much to share, and I bet we can probably think of 100 other things, and maybe next time, maybe we'll have maybe a checklist of things that we should maybe kind of go over rather than just kind of winging it.
Yeah, with the winging it, you covered a lot of good stuff, a lot of important stuff.
Well, cool.
So you did really good.
Awesome.
Can you share with us how to contact you and your company, RFsafe, and things?
Oh, sure. It's rfsafe.com. I have the largest SAR database on the internet. I get thousands of people, kind of go there for that, checking their phone. So if you were to, Google like what the rate, SAR is the Pacific Absorption Rate. And that is what the FCC uses to, basically say it's okay to sell a cell phone or not. It's a test that we do not agree with. But I actually have the largest SAR database in order to tell people that it's no good. Nobody would ever talk to me if I actually, I could never tell them that it isn't any good if I didn't have the information there they were looking for. So it's kind of a catch-22. But ultimately, I try to explain to people, that this information is not going to protect you in any way, shape, or form. SAR is not a valid state safety standard in any way, shape, or form. And quite honestly, the tests are very deceptive. I don't know if you know this or not, but maybe we can, if I could just say this. A lot of people look for SAR levels for a lower SAR phone. But we had already mentioned that the NTP study already showed that lower radiation levels can sometimes cause more damage than higher levels. So, but a lot of people notice that, say, Samsung phones have a lower SAR level. But this is very, very, very deceiving. So it's very important that people understand that you cannot buy a phone off of the government shown SAR levels and think that you're making your. Let me explain it this way. That test is from 1996, and phones didn't fit in your pocket in 1996. Okay, so the government gave phone manufacturers, they didn't want to tell them what size holster that they had to use, right? So the government went and put in there that you can have a holster that's between 5 millimeters and 15 millimeters thick when you do the SAR test on your phone. Well, none of us use SAR, none of us use holsters for one, right? But back then, that gave them now the loophole where they can now choose what size holster they want to test the phone in. And that can be 5 millimeters from the dummy or 15 millimeters from the dummy. People should know that Apple does routinely test their phones at 5 millimeters. Now, that's not perfect. Perfect would be maybe 2 millimeters because, your underwear and pants aren't going to be much more than 2 millimeters thick, right? So 5 millimeters is still giving them a little bit too much leeway, but at least Apple tests at 5. Well, you'll find that a lot of Google phones will test at 10, but now the majority of Samsung phones will test at 15 millimeters away from the dummy. All right, so just using the inverse square law of distance, we know that this is going to make a really big difference in the SAR level that you're exposed to, right? So one important things that you got to remember is not only do they test at different distances, okay? So you can't compare these things apple to apple, no pun intended there, but the Samsung phone does even one level worse than that. So when you buy a Samsung phone and it has this way lower SAR level than the Apple phone, you have to consider that this is a 6.5 inch phone, and they've relocated the antenna at the bottom of the phone. Okay, well, the sensor is up here by your ear. It's not down here by your neck and your thyroid, right? So if you're using one of these phones and the head SAR is really low because the head SAR has got the sensor up here and it's transmitting the radiation into your thyroid, which, by the way, at least your brain had a skull to protect it, right? Your thyroid doesn't have anything to protect it. And a matter of fact, Joel Moskowitz over at Berkeley, he's got his website, Safer EMR, a really great researcher guy there, saferemr.com. He even did he published a report on showing that the relocation of the antennas down by the thyroid may have been the increase in thyroid cancers that we've been seeing. And that's from people that think that they're buying a lower SAR phone. But as soon as you put in those two relevant factors that they're testing 15 millimeters away further and relocating the antenna to the bottom of the phone near your thyroid, it's no wonder the sensor by the ear isn't picking up as high as of a level. So people have to understand just how completely ridiculous the SAR level guideline is, and another reason why they should protest against it. Because it's just invalid and it holds no relevance to real world safety whatsoever. But I do have the largest SAR database there at rfsafe.com. You can go to RFsafe and find about 4,000 studies right from the front page of the homepage. You can click on research and you'll find about 4,000 research studies. And I've been blogging there for the past almost quarter of a century. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. My phone number is on the homepage, so anybody can call me. Yeah. Directly.
I appreciate that about you.
Yeah.
You're just so willing. It's a passion.
Yeah.
Your commitment to your daughter.
Amen. That's what it is. And in my direct line will always be on there as long as I'm living. That's for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thanks, John.
Cool, buddy. Well, God bless you, Ryan. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And and I'll look forward to, hopefully we get to do this again. This is a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
We're going to do it again if I get to choose.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I'm definitely down, man. I appreciate it. Well, God bless you, my man.
Thanks.
All righty. We'll talk to you soon.